Socrates and Cato, right? The Socrates, individual virtue, Cato, social virtue, patriotic virtue. Anyway, so yeah, so in many ways, I recommend this is my own reading of Rousseau. I recommend reading Rousseau as a Republican. So more specifically, somebody who's deeply interested and deeply concerned about individual freedom, but who sees the only real way of realizing human individual freedom through through the social contract, or to be technically more precise, through what I prefer to call the true social contract, because there's also the evil contract, right? So in this sense, I have to say, it's like, obviously, throughout the history of Western philosophy, there were people who read Rousseau as a totalitarian. But I want to say, like, if you open the text and you look at what he's actually writing, I think it's very hard to come with that impression. Like, you really need to do a lot of violence to Rousseau's text to read him as a totalitarian, I feel. But there's this interesting word, Republican, that we're going to need to explain in a second. So, yeah. So civic virtues and freedom as lack of an insidious form of dependence. Republican tradition best reflects his concerns. So again, Republican tradition. Do I want to explain this right now? Yeah, maybe I want to talk about this like immediately. So the contention is basically going to be that there are. I'm not sure if we talked about this before or not, but it's like, okay, so Rousseau, liberal, totalitarian, Republican. Wow. Well, liberal is okay. We understand that. Totalitarian is also okay. We understand. Hopefully, at least in broad outlines. When we talk about Republican, in this sense, what we mean is several things. We mean value of political participation. Maybe I should say intrinsic value of political participation. That, like, a good and happy human life, so this compared to Aristotle, right? A good and happy human life includes this notion of ruling and taking turns, ruling and being ruled. Right? That sort of active political participation is part of what makes us human, right? And so notice, so this is republicanism, and the word republicanism has different meanings, right? So I'm trying to explain here what the chapter. There's this, it's like I'm not very sympathetic to American political philosophy for various reasons, but there's this notion of, oh, America is Republican, not democratic, because we want to, put in the reins on direct democracy. Yeah. I don't want to comment on that, but this is not the republicanism we're talking about, okay? So intrinsic value of political participation. Okay. Also, importantly, that freedom is realized through through political participation in a community. Through like this can only be realized in a well-ordered society. So, like, the most important connotation I feel is patriotism. But patriotism of a particular kind, not patriotism for the sake of patriotism, right? But patriotism because it uniquely enables the individual freedom. So individual freedom only through patriotism. realizable only through patriotism. You could say, oh, Alex, isn't this the solution to the fool's problem? Yes, exactly. This is Rousseau's solution to the fool's problem, right? That it's like we are patriotic. When we say patriotism, I want to say civic patriotism, right? So this is civic patriotism or civic nationalism, right? And ideas of civic religion also we'll talk about. Well, I'm not sure if we'll talk about them, but it's important to keep them at the back of our head. It's not like Rousseau believes that, let's say, there's some relation, blood relation between people that has to be the basis of politics. No, but the idea is that again, a well-ordered community provides unique grounds for individual self-expression. And outside, this is the notion which is similar to Hobbes. Outside of a community, outside of a well-ordered community, life is horrible, right? And you can talk about these two examples again of Socrates and Cato, and very importantly, Cato is greater than Socrates. For Rousseau, Cato the younger, I think, is the patriot of the Roman Republic, right? And the reason why Cato is better than Socrates, because Socrates can only be a Socrates because he's an Athenian, right? So it's like another example that Rousseau is going to give is Jesus. So it's like for him, Socrates and Jesus are good people because they were brought up in good communities. Now they are private citizens. So this is Cato is a public virtue, and Socrates is private virtue. But you see, that's the whole thing. Private virtue depends on public virtue. Private virtue depends on public virtue. So the two examples that Rousseau himself gives, this is I forget where exactly this is from. I think this may be from the encyclopedia, from the article on political economy. You understand? Encyclopedia, right? The encyclopedia of Diderot and D'Alembert, I think. We should. Well, I have some idea about people who know, but they're not here today. Anyway, so so his examples again, Socrates and Jesus, they were uh, brought up in communities which were not completely bad, right? They were good. They are good people because there were elements of the community which were good, in relatively good communities, which later collapsed, right? But later, Athens or well, it's hard to say in case of Jesus. Should I write Judea? Should I write Israel? Right? Jerusalem collapses. And so the only thing that is left, so individualism is the only option. Like private individualism is the only option. And this is, if you want, this is the second best. So Socrates as the second best. So Cato, first best. Socrates, second best. And if you want, this is the the non-political solution to the problem of politics. Non-political, private individual solution to the problem of politics. And of course, the most important, like in many ways, there's this wonderful phrase from Boucher. Actually, the article in Boucher was written by Boucher. So Boucher and Kelly in general editors, but in this case, he's also the author, right? And it goes like this, right? That man is born innocent, society corrupts him, but paradoxically, only society can redeem him, right? So society that produces only corrupt fools does not deserve to exist. Yeah, it's also so. So let's say, okay, man is basically innocent. I like the word innocent because he's not really good. He's morally neutral. You could say society corrupts man. But paradoxically, only society, only society uh, can redeem man. So, and again, notice immediately. I think this. We have this illuminating example of Cato and Socrates, right? So, man is born innocent. In a good society, man becomes Cato. But in a bad society, well, it's like you have to. It's like in a totally bad society, there will be no Socrates. Everybody will just be a corrupt fool. Society that produces only corrupt fools does not deserve to exist. Yeah, maybe let me add this back, right? So a bad society only produces corrupt fools, but Athenian society is not bad. It's just it is maybe it was true social contract on the way to evil contract, something like that, right? So it is a society which is falling apart. But the good most people in Athens are not Socrates. Most people in Athens are not Socrates. So so man is born innocent. Society corrupts man, but paradoxically, only society can redeem him. So like in the first best, the redemption looks like Cato. So first best, Cato. But the second best, Socrates. Again, you have to understand that Socrates is also enabled by society. He also Socrates also owes on обязан своим. Socrates owes his genius, I don't know, virtue to Athenian society, at least to some extent. By the way, so Cato in Russian, Katon. We are talking about a famous Roman official who fought, and a Roman patriot, Roman senator, I think, who fought against Julius Caesar to preserve the republic. So Cato Minor, Cato the Younger, right? Um, yeah. He a senator, conservative. So Cato the Younger, right? A conservative Roman senator who fought against the revolution of Caesar. That's the basic idea. I suppose, let me go back to the text. Okay, so we were talking about the Republican tradition, attempt to recapture lost innocence and blueprint for moral redemption. Yes, maybe. So Rousseau obviously died before the French Revolution. There's a very famous. We should find this. I have this somewhere. Rousseau has a very famous letter on the French Revolution. Um, um, I mean, he died before the French Revolution, but he anticipates. He says that a great calamity is coming, and nobody should want this calamity. Nobody should wish it to happen, but it's also impossible to avert. So, and very famous. Anyway. So it's like this is another important aspect that it's important for us to keep in mind for the exam. That Rousseau actually, in his own political proposals, Rousseau is fairly conservative. Rousseau is fairly conservative in a sense that um, he's a proponent of gradual, careful, cautious reform. Society is delicate, and it's very easy to break society if you want. I think his basic stance on the French Revolution was that it was if he saw it, he would say it would be a calamity. Yeah. Okay. So we have key ideas. So interesting and important in many ways. Um, Notice, Boucher specifically talks about constitutional projects for Corsica and considerations on the government of Poland. So this is further reading, but again, students seeking a higher grade definitely should familiarize themselves with the text. Don't probably not read them, but at least have an idea of what's written there. Again, I keep talking about Rousseau's conservatism. These are the texts where you can see Rousseau's conservatism at work. Um, um, so let me actually provide some details. Rousseau, for example, talks about abolition of serfdom, отмена крепостного права. And Rousseau is very wary of this. Now he's definitely for the abolition of serfdom. So notice by the way, the considerations of the government of Poland are written to the to the aristocrats of Poland, right? And so we talk about this, the miracle of the lawgiver. So the miracle of the lawgiver, right? And you can see this miracle in action. Who are the miraculous lawgivers? Rousseau himself and the aristocrats of Poland, right? So Rousseau seems to presuppose that in every generation that it is plausible, it is thinkable that you will find a certain number of people who are, you understand, who are genuinely concerned with the well-being of the country, right? And so Rousseau presupposes that these aristocrats of Poland, whom he's talking to, that they are genuinely interested in making Poland into a true social contract. And again, he's writing from this perspective as well, from like a non-partisan perspective, right? And so they both, well, I mean, like Rousseau says that of course serfdom should be abolished, but you have to do this carefully. You have to do this gradually. You cannot just give peasants the freedom to which they are not used. They're not used to freedom. They don't know. It's like in Durkheimian terms, they will suffer from anomie, right? Lack of moral guidance. You need to gradually prepare and gradually give peasants freedom. Now, both parts are important. That first of all, Rousseau believes that you should definitely give people freedom. So, in this sense, he's not totalitarian, but you should do it gradually. Again, Rousseau takes this idea from Montesquieu, this very important idea. We talked about this in Hume last year as well, of the moral basis of a well-ordered political society. Well, actually, many of you are writing about Mill, right? For Mill, this is also very important. Society has to reach a certain stage where we're capable of being improved by free and equal discussion, right? So in this sense, this moral conditions of society plays a crucial role for Rousseau, in the sense that it doesn't really, well, it does play for Hobbes as well, but for Hobbes, like at the end of the day, states even with bad morals will survive just on the threat of punishment. Of course, it's nice to have moral support for Hobbes, and in this case, in this sense, for Hobbes, things like religion or making good laws. I remind you that good laws for Hobbes also includes um, explanation of why the laws are good. By the way, Hobbesians, we should read chapter 30 at some point. Read it maybe even carefully, line by line, because it's a very illustrative chapter in many ways. Anyway, let me go back to Rousseau. So yeah, so Rousseau's conservatism and this idea that the social order isn't just based on laws, but also on moral foundations, and the moral foundations take time to evolve. So not just good laws, but also appropriate moral foundations. And these moral foundations take time to develop. To I don't want to say develop, evolve, right? To organically evolve. And this is why the miracle of lawgiver is so miraculous. The first discourse on the arts and the sciences, I read it. I don't think it's all that interesting, but Origin of Inequality, Political Economy, Social Contract. This is Corsica, Poland. That's interesting. Now, Emile, and so let me tentatively cross this out. I'm not reading this. I'm not sure if we should read Emile. In the previous years, we never really had the time. If any of you read Emile and tell me what is important in Emile and why is it important for the University of London, maybe we'll discuss. But thus far, I have not really seen necessity to talk about Emile. Anyway, so anyway, let me go back to the text. Okay, so like Giambattista Vico, Rousseau saw the human world as a product of human intelligence. The evils are all human creation, far from being structurally inherent and deterministic, could be overcome by human will. Thus, far from being extreme pessimist that he's often portrayed to be, Rousseau had faith in the human capacity for self-redemption. Okay, so this optimistic element in Rousseau. Okay, whatever. So there's ambiguity. He was not a systematic philosopher. Rousseau did not attempt to be a systematic philosopher, which is a bit of a problem. We have seen the same issue in Hobbes, right? Yeah, and so here we have this phrase that if one gives prominence to Rousseau's preoccupation with one's moral creativity and redemption, we see Rousseau as a liberal. If one gives priority to conformity and social civic values, then he begins to look totalitarian. However, Boucher thinks it may be more appropriate to see him as a Republican, firmly rooted in the Republican tradition of virtue, patriotism, and citizenship. When we talk about virtue, again, I think the word virtue has a technical meaning for Rousseau as for Montesquieu, and Montesquieu, because the word virtue always needs to be defined, and I want to say basically virtue in this sense means patriotism. This commitment to establishing and maintaining the true social contract. This is basically what it means. Okay, so the next passage, so we have the totalitarian liberal Republican, and here's a bunch of names. Okay, so we have people like Crocker and Tellman who talk about Rousseau as a totalitarian. Then there's Handel, and very importantly, Cassirer. Ernst Cassirer is a fairly famous German neo-Kantian. You might have heard this name. So Cassirer is a defender of Rousseau as a philosopher of liberty. So as an anti-totalitarian, right? And we have this wonderful phrase that man is basically good, society corrupts him, paradoxically only society can redeem him, right? Society that produces only corrupt fools does not deserve to exist. Then there's Pocock. Okay, so when I talk about the Republican tradition, this is what I mean, right? And Pocock says that the Republican tradition begins with Machiavelli. Some students have tried to read Pocock last year. I don't exactly remember how successful they were. I think might not have been well. It's like not sure if it's all that important, but still. So okay, Maurizio Viroli, leading advocate of modern republicanism, contends that Rousseau fully comprehends the immense importance of unity of people, both culturally and spiritually. So when we say republicanism, basically what we mean is freedom through patriotism. Freedom through patriotism. This idea that freedom is only possible through patriotism, right? So importance of unity of the people, patriotism, if you want, culturally and spiritually. This unity is achieved through conscious promotion of civic virtues. This patrie, patriotism, right? Patrie, fatherland. In terms of ancient republicanism and its modern examples, and thus not really not as a nationalist. So I suppose you would contrast ancient republics with modern day nationalism, like the philosophers. Whose cosmopolitanism he despised, Rousseau equated patrie with republic, right? So cosmopolitanism also an interesting situation, because remember, Socrates and Jesus were cosmopolitans. And Rousseau in general, he supports cosmopolitanism, but Rousseau believes that cosmopolitanism is derived from patriotism. That sort of humans can be cosmopolitan only if they were brought up in true social contract, right? So only a good society, particular society, right, produces cosmopolitans. So I think they say the word despise. I don't really like the word despise here. I think it's too strong. I think the word despise here is too strong. But still, it's like I think for Rousseau there's an aspiration towards cosmopolitanism, but Rousseau never really lays a groundwork for like society of states. Like the end game for Rousseau is not the world government. The end game for Rousseau is uh, so individual sovereign states jostling for power with each other. There's a limited role for confederations and federations. So let me even add this: confederations or federations, not world government. And limited. So these confederations and federations, are going to be limited. So let's say multiplicity of. Okay, so the three examples of the true social contract that Boucher here gives are the rustic peasants, so small agricultural republics, are Sparta and Republican Rome. So not Rome in general, but Rome before Caesar, right? Okay, so we talk about this again. Moral virtue, morality is the basis of society. Fighting against corruption and oppression, passion for virtue, both love of one's country and erotic love and ardor, far more intense than for mistake. Okay, so when we say talk about this erotic love or ardor, right? This is the positive side of amour propre. Positive side of amour propre. Amour propre as a basis for civic honor, competition for civic honor and glory. So reference to Pericles and funeral oration. Yeah. So love of one's own people, institutions, collective memory manifests in a love of liberty for ourselves and our compatriots. This is republicanism, okay? Republicanism. That the love of our own freedom and of the freedom of our fellow citizens. I have to love my own freedom and the freedom of my fellow citizens. And remember, the freedom of my fellow citizens is the condition of my freedom. Like the free development of each is the condition of the free development of all, Marx says, right? So your freedom is the condition of my freedom in a true social contract, right? So consistent with republican ideals, Rousseau believed that liberty and law were correlative and consistent as long as those who fall within the jurisdiction are also those who prescribe the law. So obedience to the law that one has prescribed to oneself. Um, um, sovereignty resides with the people and not above them. In Republican theory of liberty, the individual is not constrained by obedience to the state, right, but enabled by the obedience to the state. Just laws are far from being constrained upon liberty, but on the contrary, essential element of it. There's a great difference between obedience to the law and being enslaved by it. Free people obeys but does not serve. It has leaders but no masters. It obeys the laws, but it obeys only the laws. It's due to the strength of the laws that it's not forced to obey men. Yes. So this is a very important idea for me personally. This is the problem I have with the notions of negative liberty. I am not a support. I think that negative liberty, libertarian negative liberty, I tempted to name names but won't. Right? Is very destructive in a gross misunderstanding of the nature of human condition. If you do not have the general will, if society does not take care of individuals, then individuals become prey to one another. Market freedom is not freedom. Market freedom is slavery to the corporations. Let me write this. So it's not like we choose between being free or being slaves to the government. So let me write this. The choice is not and this idea is so very much in Hegel as well, in Hegel and in Marx. So Rousseau, Hegel, Marx, in this sense, are of one mind, as far as I can tell. The choice is not freedom or government intervention, but is it going to be the government or corporations? Now, Rousseau doesn't use the word corporations, he uses the word factions. But these are partisan groups of people, cliques, groups, right? Pressure groups, interest groups, someone, right? So you can either be free through the obedience to the laws or be enslaved to other men. That's the this is the essence of republicanism. This is the basic idea. Now, you could say, "Oh, Alex, but can't obedience to the law also be bad?" Yes, of course. Again, we are talking about this normative ideal of the true social contract. True social contract, right? We are discussing what is possible. What is possible? I'm telling you, first best is Cato. Second best is Socrates. But to be a slave and a tyranny is neither first best nor second best. Of course, there also are evil contracts. There also are evil contracts. I kind of hope that this is a simple enough thought that we have been talking about since last year, that we in general understand what the hell I'm talking about. And maybe hopefully I don't need to repeat that, right? Yeah, just to be like on the just to be on the super safe side. Sort of, if you look at this picture, right? So there's this savage condition. In some sense, this is what Jesus and Socrates are trying to emulate. So you know what? Maybe let me add this here, right? I have this 3 times. Is there a difference between them? Yeah. The last arrow here is that even the true social contract is probably gonna fall, right? Probably a better way to do this. So it's gonna be hard. Socrates or Jesus. And then here we have Cato. Let me just write Cato Minor. I hope that this is clear enough. Except that this is really quite misleading, because Socrates and Jesus are only possible. Whoops, are only possible. Like technically speaking, what you want to do is you want to do this, right? Yeah, like this. This is confusing, but whatever. I hope this is anyway. Yeah, let me go back to Boucher's text. Yeah. So I wonder, should I talk about this? Obey laws so as not to obey men. Again, maybe I should at least signal this, right? So positive freedom. This is the idea of positive freedom, and this is something that Rousseau, Hegel, and Marx have in common. And in an important respect, this is their solution to the fool's problem. That rightly understood, it is in the interest of the individual to be, so it is in the individual interest to be a member of the true social contract, right? And so at the end of the day, it's like even if once you make an exception for yourself and you break the rules and you get away with rules, still, let me write this. Even if I break the rules and get away with it, I should also at the same time want, everybody who breaks the rules to be caught. presumably including myself, right? So there's this interesting tension, I would say, in this idea somehow. Um, Tension maybe is not the right word. It's like in a true social contract, everybody, even if they break this, even if they break the rules and get away with it, still want everybody else to obey the rules. And so there's a pressure. There's a pressure to create mechanisms that will make sure that we always obey the rules, everybody. But at the same time, again, for Rousseau and for Hegel and for Marx, our highest happiness, our highest fulfillment as human beings does not come from breaking the law, but from fulfilling it, from being, you know, think about these again, perfectionist ideals of human flourishing, Aristotelian ideals of human flourishing. Okay. So there's a bunch of topics here I kind of want to skip. So this Rousseau's criticism of Hobbes. We talked about this last year, and I hope it's fairly clear. You'll read this on your own. Um, Somewhere in here, there's supposed to be Rousseau's criticism of Locke. That's okay. Okay, let's talk about natural law. I don't like natural law. Okay, I do. I'm. People sometimes ask me, why do I not like Kant? I don't like Kant because he's a natural law thinker, and I disagree with natural law thinking. So the tradition to which I would ascribe people like Hobbes, people like Rousseau, people like David Hume, John Stuart Mill. Also, I would include Hegel and Marx in this tradition. We don't believe in natural rights. By nature, there are no rights. Rights are not natural. Rights are artificial. Now, it doesn't mean that human beings shouldn't have rights. It's fine. We should have rights. But rights are given by society. Rights are not natural. Rights are artificial. And the kind of one way to phrase this in terms of Rousseau is that Rousseau, like in his own religious outlook, Rousseau hopes or Rousseau wishes that nature would be harmonious, that everything would be fine. But actually, when he opens his eyes and looks outside, he sees the problem of evil, And Cambridge Introduction, Gurevich talks about this, that probably Rousseau's own psychological solution, like in his own head, Rousseau's idea is that that's just the way it is. Nature is too weak. Nature is too weak to prevent evil, right? So the problem of evil is like, if God is almighty, why is there evil in the world? And Rousseau's answer, in some senses, is God is not almighty. And again, I think we capture the spirit of Rousseau, what Rousseau is trying to do here. If we don't use these crass, sexist, patriarchal, masculine pronouns, God, who's supposed to be male, no, but it's feminine nature, which is weak. So it tries to do its best, but there's no guarantee that at the end of the day everything's gonna work out fine. So in many ways, again, rights are not natural. Rights are artificial. Society is not natural. Society is artificial. Harmony is not natural. Harmony is artificial. The true social contract is a work of art. It is not by nature. The true social contract is a work of art. It's not a work of nature. And so the rights that you have, and again, important contention, I think that Rousseau and Hobbes agree on all the major points. Still my feeling to this day, right? I would say that Rousseau and Hobbes agree in this very important idea that, again, against the sovereign, you have no rights. You only have rights because the sovereign decided to give you rights. Now, it's fine. It's fine. The sovereign will give you right to life, right to property, even for Hobbes. Hobbes imagines, in chapter 30, he imagines that most sovereigns will find it prudent to give their subjects a whole suite of rights, different of different kinds, etc., etc. But you have to understand that these rights are not natural. They are not God-given. They are given to you by the sovereign, right? And in case of Hobbes, whatever the sovereign may be, in case of Rousseau, sovereignty properly in a true social contract lies with all the people. Okay, so basically, again, Rousseau, like Hobbes, says, and this is the big problem I have with Locke. Again, people tell me, okay, Alex, what's your problem with Locke? It's not like I don't like Locke, but there are arguments against Locke, right? Basically, again, the point is that in the state of nature, life is not harmonious. Rousseau says we are unable to receive justice from such an abstract source. This is, if you want, Hobbes and Rousseau versus Locke. If we had natural rights, why isn't the state of nature already harmonious and wonderful? Why is there civil, sort of, if there are natural rights, why is there a civil war in Somalia right now? And I do not think that at the end of the day, Locke has a satisfactory answer to this question. Should I add Somalia? Yeah, let me write Somalia. What would Locke say about Somalia? And it's like I kind of feel sometimes that, wonderful British gentleman John Locke hasn't been very far from London and doesn't know what Somalia is like. Anyway, so by nature we have this limited compassion, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Limited compassion is not it's not enough to make us social, right? Anyway, so let me maybe focus on this last slide. The rights are not natural, but instead founded upon conventions. The constitution of a state is a work of art. There's more to be said about this, but this is important, right? So now you could say, okay, Alex, what is goodness? What is virtue? I'll tell you what is goodness, what is virtue for Rousseau. The criterion of ethical conduct is not an abstract natural law divorced from experience of human beings. Take that, John Locke. Take that. Nor principles based upon self-interest capable of justifying any capricious act, but instead, a criterion is immanent in the real will of individuals, a criterion based upon the principle of common good rather than self-interest, the idea of general will rather than particular will. And sort of individual self-interest, particular will, this leaves us open to the fool's problem, like in some sense. And again, notice, I feel that in general, it's fair to have a utilitarian view of Rousseau. Rousseau says, I will always try to bring together what right permits with what interest prescribes, so that justice and utility do not find themselves at odds with one another. Reconcile justice and utility. This is why I think that, broadly speaking, you can reconcile Rousseau and Mill. Okay, so then we talk about this wonderful quote that you all should know by heart. Find a form of association, defends and protects with all common force, person goods of which associate, by means of which each uniting with all, nevertheless obeys only himself, remains as free as before. This should be screamingly obvious. We all know about this. Yeah. Okay. So then we have this problematic issues about democracy. I'm not sure how much I want to go into this because this is potentially a very long discussion. A couple quotes. The general will is always right, but the judgment that guides it is not always enlightened. It must be made to see objects as they are, sometimes as they ought to appear to it, right? This is a problem of the general will, problem of democracy. But then at the same time also, talking about consent, any law which the people has not ratified in person is void. But ratification, can be done also through tacit consent. Tacit consent. The silence of the people, but the people have to have the ability to speak up. Okay, then we have this interesting and problematic all sorts of way. Well, I would say mostly interesting ideas of lawgiver, religion, and censorship. Again, you can see parallels between Hobbes on the one hand and Hegel on the other hand. Do you see parallels to Marx? Well, Marx, I would say Marx is also a nationalist. My understanding of Marx as a nationalist comes from my reading of Rousseau and Hegel. And I want to say Marx is a nationalist because he talks about this, again, this transition from class in itself to class for itself, right? So we talk about this international cosmopolitan workers' nation, right? I take these ideas basically from my reading of Rousseau and Hegel and reading Marx side by side. Still, yeah, so the lawgiver is a miracle, it's a problem, whatever, we'll talk about this. Let me point your attention. I think that there's a phrase which I don't like very much. Um, you know, that the lawgiver is a type of a benevolent father forcing people to be free. I'm gonna cross this out. It's not like it's wrong, but let's be careful, okay? Let's be careful with this phrase. I don't like the I understand what David Boucher means, but I don't like the phrasing. Um, and I think it leads people astray, and people in all sorts of ways uh, um, misinterpret this phrase. You could say, okay, Alex, but how should we understand the lawgiver then? Understand it as a person with great intuition. So, like Kyrgyz has a great intuition. Uh, Probably doesn't really understand the full ramifications of his actions, but uh, uh, through the strength of personal character and outward costly signs of virtue, he quasi in a quasi religious fashion persuades the population, persuades people, persuades others. Now it's hard to do, and most people will not be like this. And the soul of the lawgiver is a miracle. Soul of the lawgiver is a miracle, of course. But you know, benevolent father forcing people to be free again. This sounds very misleading to me, at least, or at least possibility of misleading, of being misread. Anyway, so then there's Jihad Christianity. Um, uh, yeah, and then Boucher talks about these four things, trying to defend Rousseau from the charge of being totalitarian. Four things specifically that so number one, they talk about forcing to be free really only applies to lawbreakers. So it's not you know, and notice that forcing to be free in this sense happens in every functioning state and must happen in every functioning state. Uh, then they talk about how the legislator would not be a permanent would not be a permanent feature of the state. There's no evidence, right, that the legislature is supposed to be a permanent feature of the state. And in fact, again, I want to say that again, it's very important. The legislator has no formal authority. The legislator has no formal authority. The legislator persuades. The legislator cannot rule, right? Temporary authority of guidance. Uh, Corrupt population to accept some fundamental constitutional laws which are meant to be for the common good, but which the people in the corrupt condition dominated by the particular may not see, right? And then we talk about civic religion, which is not meant to force everyone to hold the same theological beliefs. It's meant to support a set of rules which contribute to the sociability of members. And there's more to be said about civic religion, but in a certain basic fashion, civic religion is also has to do with patriotism. Again, this notion that breaking the law, um, breaking the social contract, is not to be taken lightly. Is very serious offense, right? Like imagine I go into a super, so it's like imagine I go into, so it's like let's say uh, punishment is not payment. So imagine I go into a supermarket and I buy something, right? I exchange money, let's say for an apple. I exchange money for an apple, right? So I give money and the store owner gives me apple, right? Rousseau insists you should not see breaking the law in the same fashion, right? That you know, I went over the speed limit and now I'm paying some money to the policeman, right? So it's like a fine, straf, is not a payment, right? So let's say fine, yeah, speeding fine is not payment for apple. You should feel bad. You should feel bad. You should feel bad over and above the you know, the loss of money. Like you should feel you have done something wrong And this is the ultimate idea of the social contract, of the civic religion. What is sacred, most first and foremost, under the civic religion is the social contract. This is what is sacred. Yeah. So also we have this interesting. I'm going to have to cross this out, right? So censorship was meant to put people back on the moral path. Let me cross this out. Rousseau insists that censorship can only preserve and not restore morality. You could say, "Oh, Alex, where are you taking this from? Why doesn't Boucher write about this?" Rousseau, Rousseau, Rousseau. We have to read Rousseau. We have to read these chapters very carefully by ourselves, and this is how we know what Rousseau is saying. You see, like for Hobbes, in many ways, the most important reading is Boucher. For Mill, in many ways, the most important reading is Boucher. But for Rousseau, the most important reading, I feel, is Rousseau himself. Mm. Yeah. So these are the 4 or 5, let's say, 4 aspects for which Rousseau is criticized. 4 aspects below 4. And these are, again, forcing to be free. Should I write this? Maybe I should. Force to be free. Lawgiver, civic religion, and censorship. And again, it's like in many ways, this is the task, your task on the University of London, to show why these 4 do not actually mean that Rousseau is a totalitarian. At least in my understanding. Defend Rousseau from this charge. Mm. Yeah. So again, to go back to this Republican stuff, there's a quote I like. So freedom is equated with obedience to the law. The law is equated with expression of the general will of the whole community. Freedom or liberty can only be maintained by full and enthusiastic participation of citizenry and legislative process and activity of governance of the patrie. Mm-hmm. So again, so this notion that again uh, can't be free without patriotism, or if you want the civic nationalism, that all this stuff, right? So 4 aspects: force to be free, lawgiver, civic religion, censorship. They are necessary conditions of freedom, and this is why we call Rousseau a Republican and not a totalitarian. For people who think that Rousseau is a big fan of equality, I think he's not, right? The state should grant no distinction save for merit, virtue, and patriotic service. So when we talk about this elective aristocracy, this is basically what we're talking about. Elective aristocracy. So this is not aristocracy of birth, but aristocracy. So not birth, but merit, virtue, and patriotic service, which are basically all the same thing, but merit, which is virtue, which is patriotic service. Mm. Yeah, so uh, let me look at this, right? So when men enter into society, they cannot be free of all dependence, right? So this is important for us. So we depend on the true social contract. Like if we were gods, it would be nice if we were all independent, but it's impossible. It's impossible. What we can do is we can substitute one form of dependence on another. The true social contract is not the best, but it's the best possible, basically, because humans are not gods. So each citizen, so personal dependence is avoided by the dependence upon law. So again, to have a law so as not to have a master. Obey the law so as not to obey a master like a slave, right? Each citizen is pledging himself to the whole safeguards himself against personal dependence. This Rousseau believes is a condition of the successful operation of institutions. Governments, however, are inclined to undermine the general will. This is definitely a very important problem in Rousseau, the problem of government, right? Government as different. So I should write this. Government is not the sovereign, right? The government is an appointed minister of the sovereign. This is how a monarchy can be a republic. A monarchy can be a republic. Right. So government will have personal biases of their offices. Vladimir, fool's problem. Right. So, even Rousseau acknowledges that, especially when you talk about government, the post of government officials, Rousseau phrases the fool's problem as that the particular will of the magistrate seduces the magistrate away from the obedience to the general will. Anyway, this is circumvented in Rousseau, but however, by popular assemblies. So this is super important. So anybody who thinks that Rousseau is totalitarian, right? So Rousseau says we need popular assemblies to which the government whose authority is in suspension for long as the populace means is accountable, right? The people is sovereign, the government is accountable to it. At each assembly, a vote of confidence is moved, and it takes the form of two questions. Two questions. So you have regular assemblies with two questions. The first relates to the desirability of continuing the present form of government. Do the people want to change the form of the government? And the second, do we want to keep the same people in check? Okay, there's now another section of which is missing from Boucher, and this is the section on women. And I'm not sure. It's not here. It's not in the scan. I'm not sure if it's really relevant. It probably is not. I want to alert your attention to the fact that it's there. But should you read it, that's up to you. Well, it's like if you have the time, look through it. But I feel that it's less important for the exam. And of these texts, my favorite, are O'Hagan, Timothy, Rousseau, and it's a wonderful text which is available in Teams. Yeah, so I suppose another important issue, and this is an interesting point of contention between Rousseau and Hegel, Rousseau on the one hand and Hegel and Marx on the other, is that Rousseau, he appreciates history, but maybe he doesn't appreciate history enough. Maybe he doesn't appreciate history as much, right? So for Rousseau, the true social contract is only possible in these very special circumstances. You need to have the miracle of the lawgiver. You need to be small, relatively homogeneous, right? And I feel that in many ways, the political project of Hegel and Marx, is how can you bring the general will, in case of Hegel, for huge nation states, and for Marx, can you bring the general will to humanity as a whole? Now, in principle, because everybody needs to choose different thinkers, I did not tell you this, but actually, my favorite thinkers in this course would be exactly Rousseau, Hegel, and Marx, precisely because I think that Rousseau lays out the problem in the clearest possible fashion. Then Hegel gives us a solution which is more or less workable today, I think, and then Marx asks about what is the future. So it's like Rousseau is, if you want, our foundation in the past. Rousseau is the past. Hegel is the present, and Marx is the future with a question mark, right? So this is my holy trinity in this course. And again, to the extent that you are writing to the extent that you're writing maybe is overlapping between these three philosophers, I hope that you can benefit. But don't worry too much if this is not the three philosophers you have chosen. Actually, don't worry at all, because the complications in each are special and it's like of their own kind. And I still stand by the notion that you should have chosen the philosophers which you find congenial. But in terms of your understanding, I think that in order to properly understand Hegel and Marx, you need to see important Rousseauian elements in both. Okay.